3 years after my supervisor got me fired and nearly ended my nursing career, she called me sobbing, begging for help, right before I learned I was the reason she was under investigation. My name is Amelia Powell, and for a long time, being a nurse wasn't just my job, it was the thing I built my entire life around. I didn't come from money or connections. I worked double shifts as a CNA through nursing school, lived with 2 roommates in a tiny apartment. When I got hired at Westbrook Medical Center in Denver, it felt like I had finally crossed some invisible finish line. My parents drove 6 hours just to see the building, like it was a landmark. I worked in the Surgical Recovery Unit, PSU, where patients wake up from anesthesia confused, scared, and sometimes in serious pain. It's controlled chaos. And I was good at it. Not in a bragging way, just solid. Reliable. The nurse people asked for when they got a complicated case or a nervous family member who needed extra reassurance. I liked being that person. It made the exhaustion feel worth it. For the first 2 years, I barely thought about management at all. My world was patients, coworkers, and surviving 12-hour shifts without forgetting to eat. Then our unit got a new supervisor, Elizabeth Miller. She transferred from another hospital in the system, already carrying this aura of confidence. She dressed like she belonged in administration, not on a hospital floor, tailored blazers, sleek ponytail, the kind of makeup that somehow never smudged even during emergencies. Within a week, she knew everyone's names, schedules, and weak spots. Doctors loved her immediately. She spoke their language, anticipated their needs, laughed at their jokes. Upper management praised her for bringing structure to the department. Staff nurses were more cautious. Elizabeth wasn't openly cruel. She didn't yell or insult people. It was subtler than that. She would ask pointed questions in meetings that made you sound unprepared. She'd follow up on tiny mistakes with formal emails. She had a way of smiling while making you feel like you were already in trouble. But with me at first, she was warm. Almost overtly so. "Amelia, I've heard excellent things about you," she told me during one of her early rounds. "You're exactly the kind of nurse we want to develop into leadership." I remember going home that night and telling my mom, feeling proud in a way I hadn't in years. Over the next few months, she kept pulling me into small projects, reviewing supply procedures, helping orient new hires, giving input on scheduling changes. Nothing official, nothing that came with a title or pay increase, but it made me feel noticed. Seen. "Charge nurse material," she said once, almost casually. I believed her. Looking back, I wonder if that's when I stopped being cautious. When I started assuming she was on my side. The first time I noticed something was off, it was almost nothing. I was doing a routine medication count at the end of a shift, double-checking controlled substances before handing the cart over to the night nurse. It's one of those tasks you can do half asleep, count, sign, move on. Except the numbers didn't match. I counted again. Still wrong. 1 vial of a strong opioid was missing from the log. Not a huge amount, but enough to matter. Controlled meds are tracked obsessively. Discrepancies trigger investigations, paperwork, sometimes even drug testing. I checked the administration records. No entry. My first thought was simple: someone forgot to chart it. It happens more often than hospitals like to admit. Nursing is constant interruption. You give a medication, get pulled into another room, respond to an alarm, answer a family question. Suddenly an hour has passed and documentation slips through the cracks. So I left a note for the next shift to verify and fix it if possible. The next morning, the count was magically correct. No explanation. No late entry. Just fixed. I told myself I must have miscounted. I was tired. It had been a brutal shift. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, the discrepancy would appear during my shift or right before it and be resolved by morning with no documentation trail. No incident report, no corrective note, nothing. The pattern started to bother me, not just as a nurse, but as someone who knew how badly things could go if controlled substances weren't accounted for. People lose licenses over this. Hospitals face lawsuits. Patients get hurt. So one afternoon, after a relatively calm shift, I printed the logs and went to Elizabeth's office. Her door was open. She was typing something on her laptop, glasses perched low on her nose, looking exactly like the image of a competent administrator. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. She looked up and smiled immediately. "For you?" "Of course, Amelia. What's going on?" I explained the discrepancies, showed her the logs, emphasized that I wasn't accusing anyone, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a system error or documentation issue we needed to address. She listened quietly, nodding. When I finished, she gave a small sigh, like this was mildly inconvenient, but not alarming. "Thank you for bringing this to me," she said. "Medication tracking is something we take very seriously." Relief washed through me. That was exactly the response I hoped for. "I'll review these personally," she continued. "In the meantime, don't worry about it. Sometimes pharmacy corrections don't show up in real time." That made sense. Or at least, it sounded like it did. I left her office feeling reassured. Proud, even, for handling it the right way. I had no idea that conversation would quietly flip a switch, one I wouldn't even realize had been triggered until my life started unraveling weeks later. At first, nothing obvious happened. No confrontation. No warning. No dramatic meeting behind closed doors. If anything, Elizabeth seemed even nicer for about a week after I talked to her. She'd stop by my station, ask how my shifts were going, make small talk about weekend plans like we were friends instead of supervisor and staff nurse. It almost made me feel silly for worrying. Then the audit started. In healthcare, audits aren't unusual. Chart checks, medication reviews, compliance spot checks, it's part of the job. But this felt different. Instead of random samples, Elizabeth began reviewing every single chart I touched. Not everyone's. Just mine. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Maybe I'd had a complicated caseload. Maybe something flagged automatically. But then she started emailing me directly with lists of documentation concerns. They were tiny things. A missing time stamp on a reassessment. A pain score recorded in the wrong field. Once she flagged me for writing patient resting comfortably instead of documenting the exact position of the bed. Technically, she wasn't wrong. But none of it was stuff people usually got formal emails about. Meanwhile, other nurses were making the same minor errors without consequences. I knew because we all helped each other chart during busy shifts. We saw each other's work constantly. One afternoon in the break room, Sloane Emerson dropped into the chair across from me with her lunch tray and lowered her voice. Okay, what did you do? I blinked. What? Elizabeth's on you like white on rice. She pulled 3 of your charts yesterday. My stomach tightened. She said it was routine. Sloane snorted softly. Nothing about her is routine. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just shrugged and pretended it didn't bother me. But it did. A lot. Every shift started to feel like walking into an exam I hadn't studied for. Then came the schedule changes. I had always worked a consistent block of day shifts, which in nursing is gold. Suddenly I was rotated to nights to balance staffing needs. Night shift isn't just different hours, it wrecks your sleep, your social life, your ability to function like a human being. When I asked Elizabeth about it, she gave me a sympathetic look. Everyone has to be flexible, Amelia. We all make sacrifices for the team. Except not everyone had been moved. Just me. Nights were brutal. Fewer staff, more responsibility, and doctors who were half asleep when you called them. I started drinking too much coffee, sleeping at weird hours, missing family events because I was either working or recovering from working. And the medication discrepancies didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Twice I found missing doses during my shift that later reappeared without explanation. Once I stayed 45 minutes after clocking out trying to reconcile a count because I was terrified of leaving something unresolved. The next day, Elizabeth emailed me. Please ensure you are completing counts accurately before shift handoff. Discrepancies create unnecessary risk. No acknowledgement that I'd stayed late trying to fix it. No appreciation. Just a subtle implication that it was my fault. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was miscounting. Maybe I was too tired. Night shift messes with your brain in ways that are hard to describe if you haven't lived it. But then something happened that I couldn't rationalize away. A patient came out of surgery with a complicated pain management plan involving a controlled 4 medication that had to be carefully titrated. I followed the protocol exactly, documented every dose, every adjustment, every vital sign. At the end of the shift, the medication total didn't match what the pump showed had been administered. I checked my charting. Correct. I checked the pump history. Correct. But the supply count was off. Heart pounding, I called pharmacy to verify the dispensing log. They confirmed the amount issued matched my documentation, not the remaining supply, which meant something had been removed. I filed an incident report immediately. In nursing, that's basically saying, I don't know what happened, but this isn't right. The next day, Elizabeth called me into her office. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. Close the door, please. That phrase alone made my pulse spike. She had my incident report printed out on her desk. Amelia, she said, folding her hands, this is a serious allegation. I know, I said quickly. That's why I reported it. She studied me for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Are you absolutely certain you followed protocol? Yes. No deviations? No interruptions? No one else accessing the medication. Not that I saw. Another pause. Well, she said finally, after reviewing the situation, we found no evidence of missing medication. The counts are correct. I stared at her. But they weren't when I left. She gave a small, tight smile. Then perhaps there was a documentation error that has since been corrected. The way she said it made it sound like the error was mine. I walked out of that office feeling like the floor had shifted under me. Not just confused, unsettled. Like I had stepped into a version of reality where facts didn't stick. After that meeting, the pressure intensified. More audits. More emails. More subtle digs during staff meetings about accountability and attention to detail. She never named me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. Even doctors started treating me differently, like they'd heard something. Conversations became shorter. Requests were double-checked. I stopped sleeping well. I replayed every shift in my head, wondering where I'd messed up, what I'd missed, how I could prove I wasn't incompetent. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning after a particularly chaotic night. I was exhausted, shaky, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep across 2 days. Elizabeth asked me to stop by her office before leaving. HR was sitting there. Two people I'd never seen before. Folders on the table. Neutral expressions that screamed bad news. My mouth went dry instantly. Amelia, Elizabeth said, voice smooth and distant now, we've reviewed multiple incidents related to documentation and medication handling. Based on these findings, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Just like that. No build-up. No warning. I tried to speak, but my brain felt scrambled. There must be some mistake, I said finally. I've been asking for help with these issues. One of the HR representatives slid a packet across the table. You'll find the details here. I flipped through it with trembling hands. Page after page of incidents, most of them the exact minor issues she'd been emailing about. Framed together, they looked damning. Like a pattern of negligence. I wasn't given a chance to correct any of this, I said. Elizabeth gave me a look that almost resembled sympathy. Almost. We discussed concerns multiple times. Discussed. Not disciplined. Not coached. Not formally warned. But suddenly it was enough to end my career. Security escorted me to my locker. I packed my things in silence, a stethoscope, spare scrubs, a coffee mug that said nurses call the shots. My hands shook so badly I dropped my badge twice. As I walked out through the employee entrance, the sun was rising over the parking lot. People were arriving for day shift, chatting, carrying coffee cups, living normal lives. Mine had just imploded, and no one even noticed. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next, how you rebuild a life when the thing you built it around gets taken away in 10 minutes. The first thing I did when I got home was take off my scrubs and throw them in the back of my closet like they were contaminated. Not in a dramatic way. I just couldn't look at them. The fabric felt heavier than it should, like it carried everything that had just happened. I stood there in my bedroom in my tank top and compression socks, staring at the empty hanger rod where my clean sets used to hang in neat rows. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and realized I had no idea what to do next. In nursing school, they teach you how to handle codes, trauma, grieving families, impossible workloads, but nobody teaches you what to do when you suddenly aren't a nurse anymore. I called my mom first. Not because I wanted to, but because she would hear it in my voice eventually. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, asking about my shift. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Amelia, she said, voice tightening immediately. What's wrong? And then I started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just this quiet, leaking kind of crying that wouldn't stop. I told her I'd been fired, that they said it was documentation issues, that I didn't understand what happened. She kept saying, there must be some mistake. They can't just fire you like that. But they can. In most places, they absolutely can. The next few weeks blurred together into a strange, anxious limbo. I updated my resume, applied to every hospital within driving distance, rehearsed neutral explanations in my head for interviews that never came. When I did get callbacks, everything seemed promising until they asked why I left Westbrook Medical Center. You can feel the shift over the phone. The polite interest cooling into something cautious. Due to performance concerns, I'd say, because that's what the paperwork said. Thank you, we'll be in touch. They never were. Healthcare is smaller than people think. Word travels. Even without details, a termination from a major hospital sticks to you like a stain. Savings disappeared faster than I expected. Rent, student loans, car payment, insurance, all the things that used to feel manageable on a nurse's salary suddenly looked enormous. I sold my car and bought a used one with more miles than I wanted to think about. I canceled subscriptions, stopped going out, started calculating grocery costs down to the dollar. There were nights I ate cereal for dinner because it was cheap and required no emotional energy. The worst part wasn't the money though. It was the loss of identity. When people ask what you do, you don't realize how much that answer anchors you until you don't have one. I stopped seeing friends because I didn't want to explain. I avoided family gatherings because I couldn't handle the pity. Eventually, out of desperation, I took a job at a small outpatient clinic doing basic intake and vitals. It paid less than half my old salary and didn't require half my training. Some days it felt like I had spent years climbing a mountain only to be pushed back to the bottom. But it was something. Around that time, Sloan Emerson texted me out of the blue. Hey, miss you. How are you holding up? We met at a coffee shop near the hospital, neutral territory. I remember feeling nervous walking in, like I was sneaking back into a life I wasn't supposed to visit anymore. She hugged me hard. You look exhausted, she said bluntly. Thanks, I said, trying to laugh. We talked about safe topics at first, coworkers, patients, gossip about a doctor who had apparently been caught sleeping in his office. Then her expression shifted. Okay, she said quietly. I shouldn't say this, but things have been weird since you left. My heart started pounding. Weird how? She glanced around like someone might be listening, which in hindsight was probably unnecessary, but still unsettling. Elizabeth keeps talking about tightening procedures, Sloan said. Like she saved the department from some huge risk. Administration loves her for it. That hit like a physical blow. So I'm the risk now, I said. Sloan didn't answer directly. That was answer enough. She got promoted, she added gently. Associate Director of Nursing. I stared down at my coffee, watching the surface ripple from my shaking hands. Promoted. For what had destroyed me. It doesn't make sense, Sloan said. You were one of our strongest nurses. Not strong enough, I muttered. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, a lot of us don't buy the official story. It helped a little. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to remind me I wasn't completely invisible. After that, I forced myself to stop asking for updates. Knowing what was happening there just reopened wounds I was trying to close. Slowly, painfully, life began to settle into a new shape. About a year later, I landed a position at Pine Ridge Rehabilitation Hospital. Long-term recovery patients, strokes, surgeries, serious injuries. Slower pace, fewer emergencies, more relationship building. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of surgical recovery, but it was meaningful in a quieter way. Patients remembered your name. Families brought cookies. You got to see progress instead of just crisis. And most importantly, nobody knew my past. I was just Amelia Powell, the new nurse who stayed late to make sure Mr. Henderson got his extra blanket and sat with Mrs. Klein when she got anxious at night. No whispers, no suspicious looks, no sense that I was being watched. For the first time in a long while, I felt something like peace. Which is probably why the phone call hit so hard. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at home, still in my scrubs, eating leftover pasta straight from the container. My phone rang from an unknown number. Normally I ignore those, but something made me answer. Hello. Is this Amelia Powell? The voice was male, formal. Yes. My name is James Davis. I'm calling regarding your former employment at Westbrook Medical Center. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Yes, I said carefully. I'm part of a compliance investigation related to medication handling practices. Your name came up as someone who may have relevant information. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like being pulled backward in time, straight into the worst period of my life. What kind of information? I asked. He spoke in measured, professional tones, asking about protocols, supervision structure, whether I had ever raised concerns about discrepancies. My mouth went dry. Yes, I said finally. I did. To whom? My supervisor at the time. Elizabeth Miller. There was a pause on the line, the faint sound of typing. Did you document those concerns formally? No. I brought them to her directly. Thank you, Ms. Powell. That's very helpful. We may follow up if additional clarification is needed. And, just like that, the call ended. I sat there staring at my phone, heart hammering, pasta forgotten in my lap. All the old anxiety came rushing back, the audits, the meetings, the feeling of reality bending around me. For 3 years, I had tried to move forward, to build something new out of the wreckage. And suddenly, without warning, the past had found me again. For the rest of that evening, I couldn't focus on anything. I turned on the TV and watched the same episode of some reality show without absorbing a single word. My phone sat on the coffee table like it might explode at any moment. Every time it buzzed with a notification, my chest tightened. I kept replaying the call in my head. Compliance investigation. Medication handling practices. Your name came up. It felt unreal. For 3 years, nothing had happened. No follow-up, no explanation, no closure. I had slowly convinced myself that whatever went wrong back then would stay buried. Apparently not. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd jerk awake thinking about Elizabeth's office, HR's blank faces, the weight of that termination packet in my hands. By morning, I had convinced myself the investigator would call back immediately. He didn't. A full day passed. Then another. Life at Pine Ridge continued like normal. Patients needed meds, dressings needed changing, families needed reassurance. Outwardly, I functioned. Inside, it felt like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. Then, 2 days after the call, I got an email. Not from the investigator. From Elizabeth. I recognized her name instantly, even though the address was unfamiliar, a personal Gmail account instead of her hospital one. Just seeing it made my stomach drop like I'd stepped off a ledge. The subject line was simple. Amelia. No greeting, no context. Just my name. My hands were already shaking when I opened it. Amelia. I hope you're doing well. I recently heard that there may be some routine reviews happening related to past department procedures. I understand you might be contacted, and I wanted to reach out personally before anything gets misunderstood. Routine reviews. The phrasing felt deliberate, like she was trying to shrink something big into something harmless. There were many complex factors at play during that time, including directives from administration and pharmacy that staff nurses may not have been aware of. If you have questions or concerns, I would be happy to meet and discuss the situation so we can ensure everyone's recollections are accurate. Ensure everyone's recollections are accurate. My skin prickled. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what happened to me. It was a preemptive attempt to shape the narrative. I closed my laptop without replying. For the rest of the day, I felt like I was being watched, even though that was irrational. Every unfamiliar car outside my apartment made me glance twice. Every notification made my pulse jump. The next email came the following morning. Longer. Less polished. Amelia, I realize this must feel sudden. I want you to know I always respected your abilities and never intended for things to unfold the way they did. The department was under enormous pressure, and decisions were being made at levels far above mine. There it was, shifting blame upward. If investigators contact you, it would help tremendously if you could clarify that medication protocols were influenced by administrative directives. No one person was responsible. Not asking me to lie outright. Just nudging me toward a version where she wasn't the only one accountable. I'd really appreciate the chance to talk in person. Please let me know if you're open to meeting. I stared at the screen for a long time, anger slowly replacing the shock. She hadn't reached out in 3 years. Not to apologize, not to check if I'd landed on my feet, not to acknowledge the devastation she caused. But now that she needed something, suddenly we were old colleagues again. Instead of responding, I forwarded both emails to James Davis, the investigator, with a short message. I'm not comfortable communicating with her directly. Please advise if I should retain these. He replied within an hour. Thank you for sharing. Please keep all correspondence. You are not obligated to respond. Not obligated. That phrase felt like a small lifeline. I assumed that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. with a text from an unknown number. This is Elizabeth. Please don't ignore me. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't reply. Another message came almost immediately. I just want to talk. I'm under a lot of pressure and I think there's been a misunderstanding. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and tried to breathe through the wave of panic. For a long time, I had trained myself not to check work messages outside of shifts. Now it felt like that boundary had been ripped away. The texts kept coming over the next few days, always from different numbers. Sometimes long paragraphs about stress and sleepless nights. Sometimes short, almost desperate lines. Please, Amelia. You know I always supported you. My family is terrified. That last one hit differently. I hadn't thought about her family before. In my mind, she existed entirely within the hospital, a force of authority in blazers and heels. The idea of her as a wife, maybe a mother, living a normal life outside those walls felt disorienting. Then came the message that stayed with me. You know I never wanted to hurt you. I read it over and over, trying to figure out how someone could say that after what happened. Whether she wanted to or not, she did. She didn't just hurt me, she dismantled the career I had built my adult life around. She left me scrambling to survive while she climbed higher. And now she wanted sympathy. A few days later, James Davis called again. Miss Powell, we're continuing to gather statements from former staff, he said. Would you be willing to provide a formal account of your experiences during that period? My throat tightened. Is that required? No. Participation is voluntary. However, your perspective could be valuable. Valuable. I imagined depositions, meetings, lawyers asking me to relive every detail. Months, maybe years of being pulled back into that nightmare. What happens if I decline? I asked. We will proceed based on available evidence. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the wall for a long time. 3 years ago, Elizabeth had taken my stability, my confidence, my sense of direction. I had clawed my way back to something resembling normal life, piece by piece. Did I really want to hand her more of my time? More of my peace? My phone buzzed again with another unknown number. I didn't even check it. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. I didn't owe her justice. I didn't owe the hospital closure. I didn't even know the truth if it meant destroying myself in the process. So when the investigator emailed me the consent form for a formal statement, I wrote back a single sentence. I declined to participate. After I sent it, my hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of choosing to step away. The text stopped after that. Completely. Like a switch had been flipped. For a while, I wondered if that meant she'd gotten what she wanted, or if things had gotten worse. For a couple of weeks after I declined to give a statement, nothing happened. No calls. No emails. No late-night texts from unknown numbers. It was like Elizabeth had vanished again, just as abruptly as she had reappeared. At first, the silence felt suspicious, like the calm before something worse. But slowly, painfully, my body stopped bracing every time my phone buzzed. Life at Pine Ridge pulled me back in. Mrs. Klein needed encouragement to walk another 10 feet with her walker. Mr. Henderson insisted on telling the same story about his dog every morning at 7:15 sharp. A new patient cried every time her daughter left, so I started timing my med pass to sit with her afterward for a few minutes. Real problems. Immediate problems. Not ghosts from 3 years ago. One afternoon, I realized I had gone an entire day without thinking about Westbrook Medical Center. It felt like a small miracle. Then Sloan Emerson called. I almost didn't answer. I was in the grocery store, comparing prices on pasta sauce like my life depended on it, but her name on the screen made my chest tighten in a different way. Hey, I said cautiously, steering my cart into a quiet aisle. Amelia, have you heard? Her voice sounded strange. Not excited, not exactly worried. Just heavy. Heard what? There was a pause, like she wasn't sure how to say it. Elizabeth is gone. My brain stalled. Gone how? Fired. As of this morning. I leaned against the shelf because my knees suddenly didn't feel stable. What happened? They did a full audit, Sloan said. Not just our unit, everything she oversaw. Pharmacy records, override logs, supply orders. Apparently there were a lot of irregularities. Irregularities. The same sanitized word they had used for my documentation concerns. She tried to argue it was system issues, Sloan continued. Or that administration approved everything. But they had signatures, timestamps, approvals tied directly to her credentials. I closed my eyes, picturing Elizabeth at her desk, calm and composed, always in control. Not anymore. They escorted her out, Sloan said quietly. Security and everything. Administration didn't want staff confronting her. The image hit me hard, not because I felt sorry for her, but because it was exactly how I had left. The same silent walk past coworkers pretending not to stare. The same cardboard box, probably. Is she facing charges? I asked. I don't think so. Not yet, anyway. But the hospital reported it to the licensing board. Her license is suspended pending investigation. In nursing, that's not a slap on the wrist. That's your entire career hanging by a thread. After we hung up, I stood there in the pasta aisle for a long time, surrounded by people debating brands and dinner plans, while my past quietly collapsed somewhere else. I expected to feel something dramatic. Triumph. Vindication. Anger finally releasing after years of pressure. Instead, I felt, still, like watching a storm from inside a house you no longer live in. That night, I kept replaying Sloane's words. Escorted out. License suspended. The symmetry was almost eerie. She had built her power on the same system that ultimately removed it. A few days later, Sloan texted again. They announced it to the department. No details, just policy violations. Everyone knows, though. I typed a response 3 different times before deleting it. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't reopen wounds. The strange part was how normal everything else felt. At work, patients still needed baths and medications. Families still asked the same questions. Someone brought donuts for the break room. Life didn't pause to acknowledge that a person who had once dominated my world was now professionally ruined. A week after the call, I was cleaning out my email inbox when I noticed something in my spam folder. Her name. Elizabeth Miller. The timestamp showed it had been sent about 2 weeks earlier, right around the time I declined to participate in the investigation. My finger hovered over the mouse for a long time before I clicked. The email was short. No corporate tone, no attempts to control the narrative. Amelia. I understand why you didn't respond. I'm sorry for how everything unfolded between us. I convinced myself I was protecting the department, but I see now how much damage was done. I hope you found a place where you feel valued and supported. You deserved that. Elizabeth. No request. No explanation. No attempt to pull me back in. Just an apology. I read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning, some angle I was missing. But there wasn't one. It felt tired. Defeated. Human in a way she had never allowed herself to be at work. For a moment, I considered replying. Not to comfort her, but to say something, anything, that would acknowledge the message. Then I closed the email without typing a word. Because what could I possibly say? You ruined my life, but I forgive you? I hope you suffer? Thank you for apologizing? None of it felt true. And more importantly, none of it felt necessary. I didn't need closure from her anymore. Closure had happened on its own, quietly, without confrontation or dramatic speeches. She had taken my career at Westbrook, yes. But she hadn't taken my ability to rebuild, to heal, to find a different version of myself. And in the end, I hadn't lifted a finger to bring her down. I just stepped out of the way and let the consequences find her on their own. Still, as I shut my laptop and sat there in the dim light of my apartment, one thought kept circling back, stubborn and unresolved. If I had given a statement, if I had told them everything, would anything have changed? Would she have faced harsher consequences? Criminal charges? Or would it have only dragged me back into the wreckage she created? I'll probably never know. All I know is that the woman who once had the power to dismantle my entire life no longer has any place in it at all. And somehow, that feels like the most complete kind of revenge there is, not destroying her, but refusing to let her story define mine anymore. A month passed. Then another. Life didn't dramatically improve or collapse, it just kept moving forward in that quiet, ordinary way that once felt impossible. Spring turned into summer. The trees outside my apartment filled in with thick green leaves, blocking the view of the parking lot I used to stare at when I couldn't sleep. At Pine Ridge, I settled into a rhythm that no longer felt temporary. New nurses started asking me questions. Families asked for me by name. One of the physical therapists joked that I was basically part of the furniture now, which somehow felt like the highest compliment. For so long, I had lived like everything good was fragile, like it could be taken away at any moment. Slowly, that feeling loosened its grip. One afternoon, almost 3 months after Sloane's call, I got a letter in the mail from the State Board of Nursing. My heart dropped the second I saw the return address. For a moment I just held it, thumb pressed against the edge of the envelope, debating whether opening it would drag me back into something I had barely escaped. Eventually I tore it open at the kitchen counter, bracing for bad news. Inside was a single-page notice. They were conducting a routine review related to an investigation at Westbrook Medical Center. As a former employee, I might be contacted if additional information was required. No action needed at this time. I read it twice, waiting for panic to hit. It didn't. Instead, I felt oddly detached, like reading about a storm in another state. Something serious, but not mine anymore. They never contacted me. Weeks turned into months and nothing came. No subpoenas, no interviews, no follow-ups. Whatever case they were building didn't require me. Sloan texted occasionally with small updates. Not gossip, exactly, more like closure delivered in pieces. License still suspended. She sold their house. I heard they moved out of state. Each message felt less personal than the last. Elizabeth was becoming a story people told, not a presence in my life. One night after a long shift, I sat on my balcony with a cheap glass of wine and tried to remember the last time I had thought about her without someone else bringing it up. I couldn't. For years, she had lived rent-free in my head, replaying conversations, imagining confrontations, wondering what I should have done differently. Now, without any conscious effort, that mental loop had broken. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. It was absence. A few weeks later, Pine Ridge announced they were looking for a charge nurse for the evening shift. My manager, Karen, pulled me aside after a staff meeting. "You should apply," she said casually. I laughed before I could stop myself. "I don't think administration would go for that." She frowned. "Why wouldn't they?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because I was fired from my last hospital, suddenly felt less solid than it used to. Nobody here had ever asked for details beyond standard verification. My work spoke for itself now. "You're one of our most reliable nurses," Karen continued. "Patients trust you. Staff trust you. That matters." That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the application form for almost an hour. 3 years ago, I had been told I wasn't leadership material. That I was a risk. That my judgment couldn't be trusted. Now someone was asking me to step into a leadership role again. My hands trembled as I filled it out, like I was daring the universe to punish me for trying. 2 weeks later, Karen called me into her office. "Congratulations," she said, smiling. "If you still want it, the position is yours." For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, eyes stinging unexpectedly. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Very," she said. "You've earned it." I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant, just steady. Like something that had been broken was finally set properly, even if the scar remained. That evening, after my shift, I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the sky turn pink over the building. 3 years earlier, I had sat in another parking lot after being fired, convinced my life was over. Now I was sitting in a different one, at a different hospital, with a future I had built myself, not one handed to me by someone else's approval. I realized then that revenge doesn't always look like dramatic confrontations or public downfalls. Sometimes it looks like surviving long enough to outgrow the damage. Elizabeth lost her position, her reputation, maybe her entire profession. But that wasn't what healed me. What healed me was discovering that my life didn't depend on her anymore. Not her opinion, not her power, not even her apology. A few nights later, Sloan sent one final message. I heard she tried to appeal the license suspension. Denied. I stared at the text for a long time, waiting for that old surge of emotion. Nothing came. I typed back. I hope she finds something else. Not because I suddenly cared about her happiness, but because I didn't want to carry hatred anymore. It was heavy, and I had carried it long enough. Sloan replied with a single heart emoji. And that was it. No dramatic ending. No confrontation. No final showdown. Just two people moving on in different directions. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if I should have testified. If speaking up would have delivered some clearer version of justice, something more definitive. But then I remember the peace I feel now, the quiet, stable life I almost didn't get back. Maybe justice doesn't always require participation. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's chaos pull you under again. I don't know. All I know is that the woman who once had the power to dismantle my life is now just a name I occasionally hear about from someone else. And I'm no longer the person she thought she could erase. But I still catch myself wondering on certain quiet nights. Did I choose strength by walking away, or cowardice by refusing to make sure she faced everything she deserved?